when I was younger and more inclined to chase paper at literally all hours of the night, I took a side gig as an Uber driver. This was on top of my full-time job in retail. Working a counter and making sales just didn't have the payout that I needed at the time, and I wasn't smart enough to just find a better job or simply negotiate a raise. Instead, I did what so many of our working youth do today and picked up a second job. I lived in this big city, drove a nicer car that I love zipping around in, so working Uber made a lot of sense in my mind. This was around 10 years ago, so the company had successfully launched and was making waves all over the country. You'd hear about people clearing six-figure salaries, all just from giving people rides around their community. People I'd talked to just in passing all told me the same thing. It was easy money that you can make hand over fist. I can't really tell you that it wasn't that I pulled a decent amount in this little side hustle, but I wasn't doubling my income like I thought I would. It also put me in this new level of exhaustion because I had to sacrifice sleep in order to have more productive Uber shifts. This meant I was going all the time. I'd get off the retail job around 5 p.m., grab a quick bite to eat, and then off to work Uber until about 2 in the morning. Anything after that time, I quickly learned was just riff-raff. And this was back when Uber didn't have quite the protocol that it does now. It wasn't unheard of for some pretty wild stuff to happen in the back seat of these cars. Fast forward a little bit, and I'm like 6 months into this new working world. I've gotten the swing of working double shifts where the higher yield areas are for pickups, and how to make a quick turnaround in both drop-offs and getting back down to the downtown areas. If you took the wrong road, you'd come up on the opposite side, where a lot of commercial and business parks were. You'd have to make these weird loops that took extra time and gas to do so. There was a hospital downtown that I would periodically idle nearby, as it had serious real estate in the form of parking lots. I could just rest here and check my phone, not have to worry about the hustle and bustle of traffic, even catch a few Z's if I needed to. There were also various fast food joints and convenience stores nearby, everything to keep me in the game. Occasionally, I'd drink a Red Bull or something, but it wasn't that often. Alas, I found myself at the end of an exhaustive cycle. I was definitely about to reach my limit. One night, during that red line period, I did my usual routine where I pulled into the hospital while waiting for a client. It was an unusually slow night, and I was expecting lots of passengers, so I didn't really know what to do. I held out that I'd make more money later on in that night, so went and got an energy drink from a vending machine in the lobby. It didn't matter. I plopped back down in the driver's seat, turned on my favorite playlist, and then passed out just right there. I wasn't asleep for very long, but it was a deep catatonic rest. You know the one? Mouth wide open, drooling, mouth breathing, looking my absolute worst. There is one thing that I dislike more, and that's the feeling of waking up when I shouldn't have been asleep. My brain starts to immediately overcompensate. I can't make any connections despite all the sparks. I can't remember where I am, who I am, what I'm doing. There are times when teachers would catch me sleeping in high school. I'd be so startled when they woke me up. I couldn't even speak proper English. Just make weird noises and get silent, then literally have to remember how to make it all make sense. It was one of those times. I remember kicking myself awake because my head was at this weird, funny angle. I made this kind of groaning sound as I snapped back into the waking world. It was still inside my car. It was still nighttime. Hell, it was the same playlist coming through the speakers. I peeked up at the clock and saw that I was only out for maybe 15 minutes. I took a deep breath through my nose and then settled into the seat. A cat nap was actually perfect, allegedly giving us more energy than a longer nap. I checked my phone and saw that I didn't miss anything, but there was a person that I could swoop up nearby and make a few bucks off. I took another swig of my drink, checked my mirrors, and then went to shift into park. I stopped though. There was something off in my rearview mirror. If I wasn't mistaken, there was a person sitting right behind me in the middle seat. We make eye contact. I whirled around, and sure enough, plain as day, there's a man just sitting not 12 inches from me. He gets a little smile across his face and just kind of nods, like he was acknowledging that I'd been asleep. It almost looked like a little hello on his end. I really didn't know what to do. Part of me wanted to start screaming at him to get out. Another part of me wanted to put on this front, act real tough, and then the other part of me just wanted to ask what he was doing inside my car. That's when I looked down and saw the Uber app open in his phone. I remember the sticker in my window that I was parked outside of a hospital. This guy probably exited my car. One of these buildings was wandering to a through street while he booked a ride. Then he just happened to see me for whatever reason. Seeing his phone helped my brain regain just a little coherence, and that put the panic to rest. So I simply said, "Hi, what are you doing in my car?" He didn't respond for a moment, just kind of looked at the floor and then the ceiling, anywhere but directly at me. I gestured to his phone and then continued to talk. "Are you looking for a ride or something?" I asked. He nodded. Okay, he's at least halfway normal. I got on at length for a bit, pulling my seatbelt on. Then I explained to him what I explained to you. I worked 2 jobs, I was tired, and I just happened to fall asleep. I said I'd be happy to give him a ride in exchange for a good review, one that wouldn't say that I was sleeping inside my car. We both shared a laugh on that one. "I'm trying to get downtown," he said. He pointed back Jackson Drive, a main drag through the area. "Where?" I asked. He then gave me these loose directions, but said it was pretty close to an old music venue that had shut down a few years before. I was familiar with that area, so I just started the route. We made a little small talk, mostly about myself and how I'd fallen asleep. This guy's name was Donovan. He said that when he got in the car, he went to speak, but saw that I was snoring, so just decided to wait. "Well, I appreciate you not being a weirdo," I said. "I was about to freak out before I saw your Uber app. Then it hits me. This guy and I aren't actually linked up. He never ordered a ride through the city, the app, and I haven't logged picking anyone up." I take a quick glance at him in the rear view and say, "Hey, I just realized this ride isn't registered. Can you find me on the app really quickly?" That's when the guy scoffs, looks out the window and says, "Oh, I'm not paying for this." I laugh, to which he just stays silent. It's getting a little awkward now. I glanced into the back real quick, realized the mistake that I've now made. This guy, it isn't dressed like a professional, no business casual, if you catch my drift. He's filthy, he's got torn up clothes, he's only got one shoe on, his face is dirty and dark from sun exposure, and there's this grimy backpack next to him. He's homeless, he has to be. While I was asleep, some drifter hanging around in the hospital must have just climbed into my car, thinking he'd be able to sleep in it or something. I noticed it on my second glance, though. Donovan is wearing a bracelet, the paper kind that they use in the hospital for discharge. This guy, probably odd behind a trash can, got Narcaned, and is now getting a free ride back to his crack house. All because I couldn't keep my eyes open, shake my head, hit my blinker, and then start guiding my car towards the next exit. "Yo, where you going?" he asked from the back. "I told you where we're going. I'm not driving you across town for free, dude." "You're lucky I don't even call the cops," I countered. I took my phone out of the cup holder beside me, just to show him that I wasn't messing around. "Yeah," Donovan said. "You're lucky I don't unlace my shoe and strangle you with it." Before I could even blink, I felt his crusty, calloused hands sneak around the headrest and wrap around my throat. Instinctually, I took one hand off the wheel and tried to break his grip, but I couldn't do it. I barely got a finger underneath his palm to create just this little space to breathe. Panic started to set in. As I watched a minute tick by on the clock, I tried to get this guy off of me. I could hear his raspy breath just behind me. The smell coming off his hands and mouth was completely disgusting. This dude definitely hadn't showered in at least a week or more. Then it finally hits me. I had to get him off of me. I check my mirrors and see that I'm alone on this stretch of the highway. I then firmly slam on my brakes. I was belted in, but dipshit Donovan behind me wasn't as lucky. He slammed forward right into my seat, which created a little space in his arms. I yanked with my free hand, broke his grip, and then gunned the car over the shoulder. At this point, Donovan has recovered and is now trying to grab me again, but I'm not letting that happen twice. We're in a bit of a standoff now. I put the car in the park and put the hazards on. I say to hell with it. This has already gone too far. I dial 911, hit the call button, and press the phone to my ear. He starts to trip out, makes a lot more threats, but starts to get out of my car now. That's when I notice he's holding a purse, a pretty nice one at that. He grumbles a little bit, shoulders his backpack and that purse, then steps out into the cool night air. He then proceeds to start walking down the shoulder, down the exit ramp, and back into the city. I hear dispatch in my ear, and I realize I can't just let this asshole go. I start rattling off everything that just happened to me, where I'm at, and where the perp is located. As I'm describing the scene, the dispatcher gets quiet for a second, maybe even mutes me, then comes back with new information just a minute later. She says my report matches an earlier one from that exact hospital that I was parked at. Apparently, old Donovan had been admitted exactly as I figured, and during his stay, he became incoherent, agitated, and realized that he wasn't being supervised. He unhooked himself from the machine, put his clothes back on, then just exited the hospital, but not before stealing a purse out of one of the rooms in his wing. She noticed not long after it went missing and got with hospital security. They got on the cameras. I didn't take very long to see this guy strolling out the front door with that woman's purse in hand. From there, he starts running, as seen on the footage. He was probably paranoid about getting caught, now that he'd exited the hospital. He zigzagged through the parking lot for a bit before coming upon my car, which was on and idling. D-bag Donovan thought he was going to be able to steal my car up until he saw me sleeping in it. From there, he just snuck into the back and hid from any potential hospital security. Needless to say, Donovan's night went south after he got out of my car. I told dispatch where I was and where he was headed, and then even followed him down the exit ramp. I didn't make it 2 blocks before a cop swooped in, blasted him with the lights and siren, and threw him in a pair of cuffs. The phone that I'd seen in his hand was the woman's phone. He'd found it in her purse. He was trying to figure out how to order an Uber in the event that I didn't wake up. It just happened to be the perfect guise in the moment. I gave a statement to the officers who hauled him off. I suspected he spent a couple weeks drying out in a jail cell. I probably don't need to say this, but remember to lock your car doors, people. I'm a 46-year-old male, and while I wouldn't say I've had a life of danger and intrigue, I have worked a handful of unusual jobs. I've traveled a good bit and have some interesting life experiences. I've also inherited some strange traits from my father, which detracts weirdos, crazies, and the troublemakers. I don't know if it's my appearance or just some sort of aura, but if I'm in a crowd and there's a mentally unstable homeless person in the vicinity, you can damn well bet that they're going to approach me. When I tell people this, they often think that I'm kidding or exaggerating. But those who are around me long enough will eventually find out that it's all true. Over the years, I've amassed a collection of stories, most of them being humorous, strange, and just interesting tales. But I do have a few stories that are just downright scary. Today, I would like to share one of those with you. On a final note before I begin, I've included some details in this story that may seem unrelated to the incident itself. My reasoning for doing so is not only because I think the setting and context are significant, but also because I've got more stories from this awful period in my life. This will make a lot more sense once you hear the story. Now, let the fun begin. Back in the early 2000s, I was living in the city of Pittsburgh and worked as a credit manager for a rental company. A few years prior, I had foolishly dropped out of college and was living in an apartment that I couldn't really afford. Bills were starting to pile up. I needed to find a job with a decent wage. A friend contacted me and told me that he was leaving his job. The company would be looking for a replacement. When he first told me about the job, I naively thought the company rented out furniture and appliances to businesses just for events, and once they were finished renting the items, they would conveniently be returned. How hard could that be? Boy, was I in for a rude awakening. After I got hired, I found out that the company's business model was to rent to own, and they preyed on welfare recipients and people with low incomes. The cheap rental rates for furniture, TVs, stereos, and appliances were enticing to those who couldn't afford such things, but unbeknownst to the renters, the items would take years to pay off. These people would 10 times more than what the item was really worth. My job title was just a fancy name for a repo man. If someone couldn't pay or refused to pay, it was my job to hunt them down and repossess those items. Oddly, out of all the insane situations that I'd encountered while out repoing in the projects, this occurrence actually took place behind the store on my day off. It's important to note that generally, when you see a rent-to-own store, it's either or near a rough neighborhood. Usually, they're located conveniently near one of those payday loan stores or a token liquor store. The shopping plaza where we were located wasn't in that bad of an area, but it was closest to the shopping center to the nearby projects. I'd heard a rumor that the plaza's large parking lot was a hotbed for drug activity, and while it wasn't that uncommon to see multiple lit-up police cars in the lot, I never knew if it was just drug bust or maybe just crackhead shoplifting. Now, being this was my day off, work was the last place that I wanted to be, but the shitty van that I drove at the time was having engine troubles. So when my shift ended on the previous night, I left the van in the back of the store and then got a ride from a co-worker who lived nearby. The plan was to get a ride back to the store in the late morning, bring my tools and work on the van, and hopefully, get it back up and running. I remember that it was actually a beautiful summer day, which is pretty rare in Pittsburgh, so I was happy at least that I didn't have to work out in the rain. The back of the store looked like your typical loading dock area that you would see at any shopping plaza throughout the U.S. The plaza itself was fairly large and roughly 300 yards long. Across from the loading docking area was where all these stores kept their dumpsters. Beyond the dumpsters, there's overgrown weeds and bushes, then railroad tracks, and eventually a wooded area that ran along the Monongahela River. Our store was located smack dab in the middle of that shopping center. I ended up getting there a little later than I wanted to. My van was high enough that I didn't need to jack it up, so I threw down some cardboard and just got immediately to work. There were some preliminary things that I had to do before I got to whatever the real actual problem was, so I didn't really get things apart until by afternoon, and by then it was moving back and forth between the driver's seat and the space between the van. Hours ticked by, and soon the sun was starting to go down. I don't remember exactly how long I was under there or had been working, but I remembered that I was in the driver's seat, trying to get the van started. At this point, I thought I had it pretty much pegged. I was pulling myself out from underneath the van, and I heard distant running footsteps. I stood up and saw this skinny dude about 75 yards away from me, running toward me. Aside from the immediate thinking that it was an odd place to be out for a jog, I didn't think much more of it. As he got closer to me, I nodded and said hi. But when he looked at me, it was the look of pure fear and panic. This man wasn't jogging, he was full-on sprinting. He was younger than I initially thought. Maybe he was in his mid-20s, and he was casually dressed. but they definitely weren't clothes that you'd wear while jogging. Completely confused, I just stood there, watched him run toward the dumpsters and then disappear. While it was odd, you usually don't see people in the back of the plaza. I was used to seeing weirdos and the occasional river people, or just homeless people who camped out near the riverbank. I shrugged it off and decided to get back to work. Around 30 seconds later, I hear footsteps once again. I see another man running toward me. As he approached, I could tell this man was bigger, and maybe in his late 30s. He had a beard and was wearing a hat. There's something about him that was a lot more intimidating, though. I'm 6'2", and at the time, I weighed about 215 pounds. People often said that I looked intimidating, to which you kinda had to at the job that I was at. But it only took one look from this man to know that he wasn't somebody to fuck with. Once he was within about 10 yards from me, he yelled, "Where is he? Where'd he go?" Without hesitation, I quickly pointed towards the dumpsters. Looking back, I felt like a pushover, just doing what this stranger told me to do. But there was this assertiveness about this guy that just made me instantly comply. This is where shit starts to get crazy. Together with a bearded man walking just slightly behind me, I began to head over toward the dumpsters, which were maybe 25 yards away. Thinking by now that skinny guy was long gone, probably deep in the wooded area near the river, I was just going to point out in the general direction to where he ran. But as we approached the dumpsters, I noticed a crouching figure behind one of them, and all of a sudden I hear, "Get the fuck out here now." When I turned around, I saw that bearded man. He was now a few feet away from me, aiming a gun directly at skinny guy. Dumbfounded, I just stood there, frozen, as if I couldn't process what was all going on. Skinny guy stands up and hesitantly walks towards the bearded man, who grabs him and shouts to him immediately, "Get the fuck on the ground." He throws him onto the pavement. I was soon snapped out of my frozen state by the sound of screeching tires. At the opposite end of the plaza, maybe 150 yards away, I turned to see a pickup fishtailing around the bend, headed straight for him. For us at full speed. It was at this moment I realized I needed to get the hell out of this situation instead of just standing there with my mouth hanging open. I ran back toward my van and just hid behind it. I see the pickup truck slam on its brakes just a few feet away from skinny guy on the ground. 2 armed men get out of the truck. Another armed man jumps down from the back of the truck. All the men were yelling angrily and every other word being fuck. I could hear one of them say to the skinny guy, "Oh, you fucked up, man. You fucked up." 2 of the men grab skinny guy and yank him up off the ground. They drag him to the back of the pickup, and at gunpoint, one of them yells, "Get in the fucking truck." They made skinny guy lie down, face first, on the truck bed. At this point, you can no longer see him. 2 of the men get inside the cab, while the other 2, still with guns drawn, climb back into the truck bed. As they're about to leave, the 2 men in the truck bed hunched down and tried to look less conspicuous. While I could no longer see their guns, it was obvious by the way that their arms were extended. They still had their guns aimed at the skinny guy's head. They sped off and disappeared around that bend. For a split moment, I just stood there in disbelief, wondering what the hell I just witnessed. It all happened so fast. After the bearded man drew his gun, it seemed like from his perspective, I no longer even existed. Who the hell were those guys? They members of some criminal organization or drug dealers. Maybe they were even undercovers for the D. I thought of the possibilities that maybe they were even dirty cops. You'd think if they were law enforcement or D, they would have at least announced it and talked like cops, or maybe even used handcuffs. Yet if they were criminals, they sure seemed organized. Didn't seem to care about waving their guns around often. Either nor did they care about the fact that I was witnessing all of it. Shortly after I had these thoughts, and they'd ran through my head, I ran into the store to tell my coworkers what just happened. I honestly can't remember who was all there that day, but I distinctly remember two of my coworkers who were there. We'll call them Sarah and Mark to protect their identities. Sarah was the receptionist. Mark was the store manager. When I told them everything that just happened, they both said something to the effect of, "Damn, that's crazy." Yet it was like they couldn't comprehend the severity of what really happened. It wasn't like they completely shrugged it off, but they didn't seem to be as shocked as I was. It was absolutely wild to me, the difference in our reactions. They were just pretty much focused on closing down. I was out back, front line to the chaos. It was a perfect dichotomy. I thought maybe it was because everyone in this godforsaken place had become so numb to the insanity, used to hearing crazy stories from the so-called road dogs like myself. Honestly, they probably weren't all that surprised to hear the people behind the store or waving guns around. After seeing their underwhelmed reactions, I regained my composure and went back outside to finish working on my van. About a half an hour later, I saw two men slowly walking behind the dumpster area. The pavement ended, and the weeds began. Occasionally, they would stop and look through the weeds and bushes, and eventually made their way onto the railroad tracks, still looking as if they were searching for something. They weren't there for very long, and after a few minutes of looking around, they just walked away and disappeared. After that, I never heard or saw from any of those guys ever again. To this day, I don't know why I didn't report any of this incident to the police. I guess a part of me suspected they were somehow involved. My theory was the armed men were undercover cops, either police or D. They had staged a drug deal and were running surveillance on one, and then they tried to arrest the skinny guy, or else maybe he grew suspicious, and that's why he fled the scene. After fleeing, the skinny guy stashed or tossed the drugs somewhere, hence the guy who were looking around afterwards. That seems to be the most plausible scenario, yet another part of me has some doubts about it all. Something about the whole thing was just off, and while it's not like the incident haunts my conscience on a daily basis or anything, sometimes I do get this guilty feeling, as if I ratted that skinny guy out and sent him to his death. Unfortunately, or fortunately, I'll never know. I ended up quitting that job almost a year later. I worked there for 3 years, and toward the end, I began to notice that I'd become very cynical, mean, and depressed. I also became a heavy drinker, among other things, and I knew I had to get out of that place and find a new path, which thankfully, eventually I did. Anyhow, I've tried to bury and forget most of these memories from that time in my life. But there were a few repo incidents that I can't forget. Like the time I almost had to jump out of a second-story window, or the time I had to hide from a customer's psychotic husband. If there's anyone interested in these stories, leave a comment. Life is pretty busy these days, so it may take me, but I enjoy writing and have plenty to write about. Thanks for listening. Back when I was married, and way more appropriately aged for the job, I was a bartender in a pretty rural community. The place itself was called the Red Bear. It was kind of a local hangout for the old-timers, the day laborers, and really anyone without drama. We'd have live music on the weekends, a fish fry on Friday, all the little quaint, small-town stuff that we do to drum up the business. I was one of the few women that worked there. The Red Bear had been the place to be in our town for something like 40 years. My mom had been one of the AUG servers and bartenders back in the day, so it was kind of a cool experience for me, tracing the same steps, completing the same duties as my mom had done for a few decades prior. We didn't have any stake in the ownership or anything, but our history there made it feel special and super sentimental. I look forward to going to work pretty much every day. This place had a history, though. Weird things happened because of it too, or at least I think so. And honestly, my first-hand experiences are pretty convincing. Because the place was a bar, some of us would be there well into the early hours in the morning. Are they cleaning up or finishing up some other closing duties? The building was very old, all brick and creaky lumber, had a lot of shadowy corners. The place was creepy, especially in the dark. If you were alone, it was extra unsettling. Even for me, the first time I'd heard about anything about the ghosts or whatever is in there. I heard it from my mom. I was just a little girl at the time, maybe 11 or 12. My mom would come home from work absolutely terrified, all pale, wide-eyed, and covered in sweat. It took some prodding, but eventually she told me some of the stories. This would set the stage for me, because by the time I got a job there, it was firmly established that the Red Bear was definitely haunted in my mind. There were really only rumors, nothing concrete about its history. Someone had been murdered there over a gambling dispute. A man caught his wife cheating with a regular, so showed up at the bar with a 12 gauge, murdered every patron in the building. A disgruntled woman who had worked in the kitchen allegedly poisoned much of the food one morning and sent multiple people to the hospital and a couple to the morgue. Again, all of these were rumors. There was very little evidence to support any of these stories. The only weird thing that might suggest one of them happened was the shotgun murder. At night, when the lights were low and a band was playing, you can see glistening things in the walls. We thought they were just glitter for a long time. But one year, when a wall repair was being made, the contractor told us it definitely wasn't glitter, but birdshot embedded in the wood. Sure enough, someone had discharged the shotgun in the main room at least a couple of times in its lifetime. Whatever the case, I found myself on one of those nights, alone and closing in the dark. The building was so old that you could hear the electricity humming in the wires if it was quiet enough. Eerie. It had a grand walk-up staircase that led to the front room. It and then spilled into the main dining room. To the left was a smaller dining room, and then the bar beyond that. Directly behind the main room was the kitchen, a dish pit area, and then some linen storage. There was a back door that led to a path that you could take to the dumpster as well. There was also a stairwell that went down into the basement. I want you to envision the dankest, creepiest hole in the ground imaginable. Fill it with shoddy woodwork, concrete, a few buzzing light bulbs, and a series of walk-in coolers and a walk-in freezer. We kept extra kegs of beer, dry storage, all kinds of random things down there. An employee could find themselves running into the basement 3, 4, maybe even 5 times in a busy shift. If you were one of the closers or had to do the ordering at all, you could spend a few hours down there just getting it organized. It was a Sunday. The place was a complete disaster. I had spent the first half of closing just trying to get it all cleaned up. I was not starting to do the restock just yet. This involved multiple trips to and from the basement, getting bulk napkins, ketchup, beer bottles, you name it. I was hauling it all up for the following day's service. Anyone who works in the service industry knows what I mean. Sunday evening is like breathing life back into a corpse, trying to keep it reanimated through another week. The business from Friday and Saturday just eats up any stock that you might have. Like I said, this place was a haunt to me by reputation, but as an employee, I didn't really think about it very often. Unless something weird was actually happening, it was never really in my mind. We weren't shaking the moment that we clocked in, or peeking into rooms before we entered them. It was a job, so we focused. I was on my 3rd or 4th trip up when I heard it. Footsteps in the kitchen. I was stocking the beer coolers in the bar, and there was a straight shot from my position, through the bathroom hallway and into the first portion of the kitchen. It sounded like someone's sneakers were sticking to the tile, and then descended the stairs into the basement. I looked up and listened, but then I remembered that I was alone. I shrugged and figured it was the ghost getting settled in for the night. There's really nothing to do about it, except for hurry up and just get the hell out of here. I had a system, though. If shit got too weird before I finished, I would just leave and come back in the morning to get it all done. I don't mess around with the dead or whatever the hell haunts this place. As I put the last beer in the fridge, I can hear one of the walk-in coolers open. The pole handles are these big jingly metal things. so they're loud as hell when you yank on them. I stood still for a moment, but everything went quiet. Just as I started to break down the cardboard of the beer boxes, I hear that cooler slam shut downstairs, and it felt like it shook the whole building when it did. All right, it's go time. I start speeding through every little job that I have left. I didn't even bother counting my tips. Just tossed them in my purse and saved it for when I get home. Sinks are drained, things are closed and secure. I just need to lock the back door and hit the lights in the kitchen. At this point, 10 or 15 minutes had passed, and nothing more had really happened. The bar kind of reverted back to its normalcy, so I disarmed my paranoia that I had from earlier. I was still on edge, but I did my last walkthrough, found a few things that needed to organize or fill in the back. I made the mistake of putting my purse down, as well as the bank bag and the keys for the door. All of a sudden, I was back in work mode, and soon I found myself running downstairs to grab a box of soda for the machine that was upstairs, as well as to turn off the lights. The owner of the building was adamant about never being left on because the wiring was so faulty. He said it was like begging for a structure fire. I could see the light switch at the bottom of the stairs. I could even see the stack of soda boxes. I didn't see anything prowling, and I couldn't hear any more footsteps. So I threw my caution to the wind and went down those goddamn stairs. When I reached the bottom, I saw the last thing that I wanted to see. The door to the biggest walk-in was wide open, and it's halfway down the basement in the middle between the first walk-in and the freezer on the end. Whatever, the lights are on. I'm already down here, so I walked over, grabbed the handle, and before I could yank it shut, something moved to my left, so I instinctually turned to look at it. At first, there was nothing there, just the kegs and random bags of cleaning towels stuffed in between them. Then I see a shadow pass against the wall, cast from the bowl behind the door that I'm holding. I don't have time to react or anything, or run like I want to. What I would describe as a big menacing shadow person quickly stepped around the edge of the door and into view. Instead of running backwards, I just fell sideways into the walk-in. It was the quickest way to create space in my head, so I just fell in that direction completely out of panic. We have those plastic blinds that try to keep the cold air inside the unit, and they flap closed after I fell through them. I scrambled backwards as the door slammed shut. I stood there for the next 5 or maybe even 10 minutes. Honestly, I don't know how long it was. I just listened to complete destruction behind that steel door. I could hear kegs banging around, slamming into the walls. Cans rolling around, boxes tearing. It sounded like a war zone. The door periodically shook with some of the louder bangs. I began to tremor too, as I didn't have a coat and holding temperature down, there was 36 degrees. After a while it got quiet, and I couldn't stand to be there any longer. I moved to the door, pressed my ear against it, and just listened. Nothing. I gently pushed the handle in, but the door didn't budge. Something was holding it closed from the outside. I got scared at first, assuming it was the shadow thing that I saw. But as I stood there, shivering for another 10 minutes, I remember all the kegs banging around. Surely, if enough of them were lying on the floor, they could be pinning the door closed. Suddenly, the reality that I might freeze to death settles on my shoulders, like the first faint layer of the frost. The frost that'll kill me. Panic gets a stranglehold on me. I start throwing myself against the door, but again, it doesn't budge a hair. That doesn't deter me, though. I push and push and push, until I realize that I'm screaming louder than I ever have before, veins bulging out of my face and neck. I swear I could feel my teeth moving because I was screaming that hard. Only after I gave up and tried to catch my breath did the thing finally start to crack open. Sure enough, as I pushed, I could feel things moving on the other side of the door, shifting around. When there was enough space, I poked my head out to find a couple of kegs and cans holding the door closed. The whole basement was a complete disaster. like a tornado ripped through there. I climbed out of the walk-in and slammed it closed and booked it over to the stairwell. There's no way in hell that I was going to stay and clean any of that up. I'll just explain in the morning what had happened. I figured that they'd understand. Everyone has had weird experiences that worked there before, but maybe not quite on this level. Only my mom has ever told me stories that are this scary. I cast one more glance behind me as I turned the lights off and went up the stairs. I swear to God, I saw that shadow thing step out from the furthest back corner, as if it manifested itself right before my eyes. Then it was dark, and I was sprinting up to freedom. I grabbed my purse and all my stuff and hightailed it through the main room and down the staircase. When I got there the next morning, everything had already been cleaned up. Everyone was desperate to know what the hell happened. I explained my story, and everyone just nodded, as if they expected it. With the level of destruction that I left behind, they figured it had to be something drastic, either a robbery or a ghost. Thankfully, nothing like that ever happened to me again, but I also never let myself be alone there anymore. A year before COVID hit, I got hired at a call center way downtown, like inner city. We worked taking calls for a roadside assistance company that will remain anonymous. Although honestly, the last time I looked them up, I couldn't even find a website for them. They may or may not even be in business anymore. Anyway, because of the nature of our industry, our office operated 24 hours a day. It wasn't this big private call center, but just a ground-level corner unit in a commercial office block. We shared a building with 10 or 12 other businesses. All of them would operate during normal hours. At 5 p.m., the whole parking lot cleared out, and the only light on was it had no signage and a keypad on the door for around-the-clock access. We would trade shifts at 4 p.m., midnight, and 9 a.m., usually in two-man teams, sometimes 3 or 4 throughout the week, or on holiday weekends. The overnight shift was typically just one guy, Benji, but holiday weekends, they'd put 2 of us from midnight to 9 a.m. So there we were, I think it was Labor Day weekend, and it's Benji and I handling the phones on a Friday overnight shift. I didn't ever mind getting these shifts because honestly, I love working with the guy. He was a little older than me and has some of the craziest stories that I've ever heard. He grew up inner city, kind of a criminal, but got cleaned up and was looking to break into the music business. I was into drawing and illustration, and he liked looking at whatever I was working on at the time. We'd just hang out and bullshit until the sun came up. We'd even troll people on the phone if they were spamming or dodging the line. Looking back now, it was a lot of fun in those dark hours and a lot of daydreaming. One night we ordered Domino's, split a pizza, and some Cinesticks. Legendary meal for a couple of call room guys. Little did I know in my early 20s that I was slowly becoming lactose intolerant. So all of that cheese and butter would send my stomach and my colon into hysterics. We ate around midnight, talked, and then worked until about 1:30 a.m. Then I started catching the gurgles. By 2 a.m., I knew something was about to happen out of one end or the other. I clued Benji into what was going on so he could watch the phone line for me. I slipped out the door, which was the only way in and out of the office. There was no secondary escape, no back door, just a big panel window in the back. In hindsight, the office almost seemed illegal. Lots of things within the operation were just shady as hell. As you can imagine, because there's so many office units, we also share a single pair of bathrooms. They were on the ground floor, and they were external. As in, the doors were open to the public. Everyone who worked there had a key to either open one door or the other. They were all the way down one of these stretch of businesses, about 40 feet, and then around a corner and tucked into a little back nook of a second floor. This kept them out of sight, so no randoms or weirdos tried to use them and or vandalize them. I go in, struggling with my unbeknownst to me digestive issues, and then wash up. As I'm looking into the mirror, I hear someone push on the door from the outside. I laugh and yell something out, as I assumed it was Benji just messing with me. There was no response except for a couple of hard whacks against the metal. Weird, but I had been in there forever, so again, I think Benji is just being funny. I open the door. There's no one there. I step out and wander down the little hallway, but instead of continuing on to the office, I hook left and go out to a small secondary parking lot. It's out in the back. It's where the dumpsters are, as well as this little outdoor area. As I step into the parking lot, I hear feet slapping the asphalt, running at me from some direction. Now I know something weird is going on. I turn and bolt back for the office. I'm sprinting and about to fall face first into the cement, but catch myself on the handle just in time. I start to punch in the code and immediately get it wrong. It's flashing red. I have to wait 5 seconds for it to reset. All I can hear is my heart, my breathing, and these flapping feet out there in the dark. I jiggle the handle and scream for Benji. I'm banging on the door. Suddenly, I realize I've switched positions. Now it's me outside being the scary, chaotic thing, and I can see him through the blinds, looking over his shoulder. He's on the phone, which is flashing red on 3 ports. It apparently picked up while I was handling my business. I turn and start banging on the glass, begging him to get up. I see him hit the hold button, swing the chair around, and rush over to the door. He pushes it open. I spill in, and he slams it right shut again, breathless. I tell him what had just happened to me. I'm expecting Benji to freak out, lock the extra bolt on the door, and tell me to call the police. Nope, the exact opposite happened. He rolls up his sleeves and steps out into the cool night air. The person was lurking around at the end of the building where it turned for the bathroom nook. They were barefoot, drug-addled, your average homeless fella in our city. I watched from the threshold of the office door as Benji pigeon-chested this guy and gave him the stern get the hell out of here stick, and sure enough got the guy to tuck tail and run.
Madison's sister lives far away. At night, when it's quiet, she can hear the ocean. Madison doesn't exactly know these things to be true because no one admits that she has a sister. Still, it's more than just a feeling or a suspicion. It's like when there's an animal in the walls. The way she scratches and swishes and thumps leave you certain of it, even if it's a creature your eyes have never seen. Madison has never had an animal inside the walls of her home. Her sister has, though. She's been aware of her for as long as she can remember, but she's only lately come to understand who she is, her twin, her other half. Until now, she was more like a projector in Madison's head that showed her images of a cold and barren place, of mist rising off the white shore of a beach made purely of tiny shells. A trickster who would wake her up with a salty, fishy odor of a dock in her nose. It's a smell she had never experienced, but nevertheless recognizes. Lately, Madison can almost see her when she closes her eyes, when she's sleeping in her bed, curled on her side. She can smell her sister's hair from wherever she, too, is lying in her home somewhere far away. It's a rotted, algae smell, but it's as comforting to her as warm milk with nutmeg. Today, for the first time, she heard her sister's actual voice. Her words tumble down, one by one, through her brain like this. Your mom is not our mom, real mommy. Her voice can be hard to understand. Madison must concentrate on it very hard all the way to kindergarten. She can't stop thinking about these words until now. She's thought of her mummy as mommy and her daddy as daddy. She realizes, though, that her sister is right. This isn't her real mommy, only a woman. The woman's husband is only a man. She wants to ask her sister where their real mommy is, if her sister is with her. She doesn't know how to talk back to the voice, though. Madison has always known that she was adopted. You weren't born from my belly, honey, but from the love in our hearts, and that makes you extra special. They have made her understand that she has a whole culture that doesn't belong to them, only to her. And they've bought her books of folk tales that are full of kids with faces like her own. She finds it strange, then, that they haven't told her about her sister. What are you thinking about? Though Maddie B, the The woman asks. Madison looks to see her eyes watching her in the rearview mirror. My sister, she says. She hasn't mentioned her before. You are? The woman says, her eyes crinkling for only a second before she forces them to look friendly again. Sister? You mean my sister, Aunt Julie? No, she says coldly, mine. She turns her face away and looks out her window. She isn't going to talk anymore if the woman is going to be a liar. At dinner, the man asks, why the long face, hun? He shares a glance with the woman, and Madison knows they've been talking. Her sister's voice says, don't answer them, and so she doesn't. The man and woman both agree. Look at her, concerned. Is it because of that documentary we watched? The woman asks, her voice full of sugar. That show on PBS about the sisters who were adopted by two different families across the whole world from each other. Do you understand that just because that terrible thing happened to them doesn't mean it happened to you? Did that show make you sad, P? Says the man. Do you want to talk about it? I want to go to the ocean, Madison says, and throws down her fork. No matter what they try to say to her for the rest of dinner, this is her only answer. At bedtime, the woman is late coming to tuck her in. Madison lays in her bed curiously listening to her thump around the attic. When the woman finally comes into her room, her hair is messy and has a long dusty cobweb clinging to it. Madison doesn't point this out. The woman has something in her hand. I didn't mean to take so long, the woman says. But look what I found. She presents Madison with the object in her hand. It's a ceramic dolphin. The dolphin is leaping as if out of the water. The ceramic water is sparkly and blue and allows the dolphin to swim. This was mine when I was a little girl. I remembered how much I used to love it tonight when you talked about going to the ocean. She sits down on the bed. It's winter, you know. It's too cold to go to the ocean now. We can talk about going in the summer, though, when it's warm and sunny and Daddy has some time off work. Would Madison talks to the dolphin rather than to the woman. I want to go to the ocean to see my sister. The woman stays in her room for a long time, talking about feelings and responsibilities and imagination, and how we sometimes can't have all the things we want. Madison pretends to fall asleep after the woman turns off the light and leaves her room. Her sister's voice says, there he is. Madison reaches in the dark and pushes the dolphin onto the floor. In the morning, she gets out of bed and hides the pieces in the pocket of her coat, which is hanging on a plastic hook on her door. When she comes downstairs, the woman is sitting at the table, talking to someone on the phone. She doesn't realize that Madison is behind her, but you're sure there were no other survivors, the woman is saying. No siblings? The reason I ask, and I know this sounds crazy, but she's begun talking about having a sister. She loves to show just how crazy she feels saying it. And I was just thinking, I mean, twins can be unusual, right? They can have a connection. So if she's right and her sister survived, no, I see. Yes, I just thought it would be worth calling to confirm. Thank you for talking to me. You too. She puts her phone on the table and only then notices that Madison has been listening. The woman jumps up and runs to her, then crouches and hugs her tight. The woman is crying. She pets Madison's hair and tries to squeeze her tighter, but her little pink coat is too plushy for her to get close. She's saying, baby, baby, baby. Madison says nothing. On the way to school, her sister shows her angry pictures of a long, skinny boat. At night, packed with too many people. The boat is sinking, and the people are hurting each other in fear and panic. Some people have fallen over the side and are floating face down in the water. A woman is standing, trying to keep her baby safe. It's hard for her to stand with the way the boat is rocking. There's mist on the water. It smells like salt and fish. There's a heaviness in Madison's chest as she watches it. She is happy when they get to school, and the pictures stop. The woman feels bad about earlier with the phone. Madison knows this because when the man brings her home from school, he tells her not to go upstairs yet. Let's go to the dining room, champ, and talk to your mum for a minute. The man is all smiles, and so is the woman when they walk in together to see her. How was school, baby? She asks. Her sister's voice says something rude, and Madison smiles. Well, the man says, must have been a good day to get a grin like that. The woman kneels where Madison is standing and takes the girl's hands in her own. Guess what, Maddie B? I talked to Grandma today about how you've been wanting to go to see the ocean and how bad I feel that we can't take you. She said that if we could let you stay home from school tomorrow, that she and Grandpa can take you for the weekend. Daddy and I discussed it, and we both think it's a wonderful idea. What do you think? You would leave tomorrow and come back Saturday afternoon? The woman does a tada with her open mouth and raised eyebrows. Madison looks from her to her husband and then nods that yes, this will be acceptable. The old man and the old woman pick her up when it's still dark out. For a long time, Madison sleeps in her coat and gloves in her car seat. When she awakens, the old man is singing a song. The old woman notices that she's up and coos. Did this old fool wake you up with his sea shanties, baby? She slaps her husband's arm, and he responds with a fake pirate chuckle. They drive for hours. When they arrive at the ocean, Madison is upset to find that the beach is just plain sand. Her sister says, this isn't real. Right. Still, despite their failure, when the old people unbuckle her, they look like they believe themselves to be the two most heroic people who have ever given a little girl anything. The beach is freezing and empty. Madison is miserable walking along the shoreline between them. When the old woman notices, she asks, what's wrong now? Isn't this what you wanted? This isn't right, Madison says into the flaps of her coat. They're wet and covered in spit from her breathing. Your mom told you it would be too cold, the old man says. Still, we drove you all this way. Don't you think it's mean to us to not be grateful that we brought you? This isn't right. Madison screams, which causes the old woman to let go of her hand and kneel in front of her, taking a hold of each arm of her coat to hold her in place. You watch that attitude, Missy. The old lady scolds her. Grandpa and I did this very nice thing for you, and all you can do is throw a tantrum. Apologize to Grandpa now. Madison bares her teeth. This isn't right, she growls. Well, the old woman says. Then we can head back right now, if that's how you're going to be. Grandpa, take her back to the truck. I'm going to use the facilities, and I'll be right there. She rises slowly, and then marches off towards a porter John that's setting at the edge of the sand away from the water. Her sister's voice says no, don't go, find me. As the old man drags her through the sand, Madison pulls and tugs and does her feet so they won't walk. Quit your fussing now, he says out of breath. You're just going to get yourself into more trouble. No, I need to go potty. The end. This causes him to stop. He eyes her like he thinks he might uncover her life from only her face. Do you really? Madison nods. She's crying now, and her cold tears are causing her to shiver. Fine, he sighs. Go see your grandma. I'll wait for you here. Madison darts off in the direction of the porter John. A strong wind blows off the sea. She lowers her head against it and tucks her hands into her coat pockets. The door to the porter John opens just as she arrives in front of it. Maddie, the old woman cries, where's your grandfather? Madison doesn't stop running when she gets to the door. She plows ahead and collides with the old woman, who loses her balance and falls backward on top of the hole where she's done her business. Her sister's voice says, pocket, pocket, pocket. Madison pulls her hands out of her coat pockets, each one holding sharp slivers of the ceramic dolphin. Another strong wind blows the porter John door closed behind her, shutting them in. When she finally comes out, she's warm in her coat and drenched in sweat. She has returned her hands to her coat pockets to hide how messy they've become. Where's Grandma? The old man asks when he sees her. She fall in? He smiles like they're friends again. She's sick, Madison says. She said she wants you to get her pills. They're in the truck, sick. His face is concerned, and he starts towards the porter John. No, she needs her pills. She said to make sure you brought her pills. Which pills? The old man yells. What pills does she mean? She says they're in the door. She left the one she needs in the door of the truck. Okay, he says, fluster. Let's go find him. I'm going to go back in case she needs me. His face says he doesn't know what to do. He shouldn't let her stay on her own. but maybe the old woman really might need her help. Okay, go to the John and wait for me. Don't walk away from that John though, Maddie. Can you be a big girl and do what I say? She nods that she can, and then takes off down the beach. She glances behind her to see the old man's sly look, attempt to hurry through the soft sand to the truck. When he's far enough away, she changes her direction and heads towards the ocean. Yes, fine. The water is cold. Even through her shoes, the waves frighten her. She thinks of those terrible pictures of the sinking boat and the screaming people. She's frozen there at the edge of the water. She has the terrible thought that she wishes she was in her room in the warm house with a man and woman. Her sister's voice encourages her. Swim, 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 swim. Maddie, stop, calls a voice from behind her. She turns around. She turns and sees that it's the old man. He's coming towards her, but he's far away. Get away from the water, Maddie. Now, she has always been such a good girl, has always done as she's told. As her sister continues to call for her, she remembers that this is not her grandpa. He's just an old man, and she doesn't have to listen to him. Family, though, is family. Madison turns away from him and looks out across the misty water, and then she holds her breath and takes a step forward into the sea. It was our anniversary yesterday. We've been married for 20 years now. A lot of couples would have had a fancy dinner to mark the occasion, or maybe pop the cork off a bottle of champagne to celebrate. But those people aren't us. Instead, my 80-foot boat. It was our own little kind of extravagance, and sailed from Biscayne to the deep Atlantic. No land in sight for miles to spend the day deep-sea fishing. Frank had been a merchant seaman for going on 10 years, and it gave him a permanent taste for the salty tang of oceanic air. I swear that man spent more time at sea than a lot of people spend on land. For him, it was almost a home away from home. For me, not so much. There was always something about that great body of roiling, swelling water that put me ill at ease. It was like spending time with a maniac or some dangerous animal with a mind of its own. The sea can kill you in a split second without a hint of exertion or remorse, and there's a tremendous, frightening power in that. The morning went off without incident. Frank, in his summery Hawaiian shirt and khaki fishing jacket, set up all his pricey rods on the edge of the bow and unfolded his fishing chair. Sitting there, sunlight caught on the lip of his baseball cap. He looked like a Hollywood film director. I was unpacking lunch in the cabin. It was a pretty spacious little room, all in all. A nice double bed for the evenings. No TV, and 3 porthole windows on either wall. I kept telling myself that we were staying in a little hotel room to ease my nerves, ignoring the boat's gentle rocking and the sound of waves licking at the hull. Frank cracked a beer outside and called in. Happy anniversary, baby. He sounded content, at least. That lifted my mood a little. Once I finished peeling saran wrap off all the sandwiches I'd made the night before, I stepped out onto the stern and took a better look at the ocean. It seemed like a calm day, and the sea was relatively peaceful. What struck me was strange, though, was that there weren't any seagulls hovering ahead, nor were there any behind us in the distance. I'd always hated the feathered rats, sure, but the sea felt too quiet without them. There was nothing to distract me from the hiss of waves breaking on the sturdy metal of the boat. However, in the silence, I caught a familiar tune coming from my husband's radio. The Bobby Darin song had been playing when we first met. Frank leaned over his chair, rod in hand, and threw a cheeky grin my way. He was wearing his knockoff Armani sunglasses from Bimini, so I couldn't see those lovely blue eyes of his. I walked over to him, one hand always clasping some part of the boat to steady myself, and we shared a long, slow kiss, like young lovers. In that moment, and for a few hours after that, everything was just fine. Later that night, when the dark was setting in, the air felt a lot heavier than before, almost like the salt was condensing in it. A chill crept across the ocean and fog was starting to blow in. So I decided to return to the cabin after sitting with Frank for a couple of hours. He hadn't caught a thing all day. Get me another beer, would you, honey? He called to me as I left, dejection clearly weighing on his voice. I looked off the stern once more before heading into the cabin. The sea looked different at night. Not blue, but black, like shimmering tar or blood in the moonlight. My skin went cold at the thought of it. In the hushed darkness, every wave felt like it was reaching for me. But eager to cheer Frank up after such slim pickings, I popped another beer from the six-pack and went back out to give it to him. But he wasn't there. No, not at his seat or anywhere else. The breath left my body as I scrambled to look over the edges. Frank had always been a strong swimmer, and I knew he had more sense than to just jump in. It felt awful. It felt impossible. I checked every inch of that boat, inside the cabin and out. There were no lights in the distant darkness, so he couldn't have gotten onto another boat. His rods were undisturbed. I never even heard a splash. In those moments, all I could do was panic. My husband of 20 years was gone without a trace, vanished completely. Not a speck of blood, not a drop of blood. Of water, not a single thing was out of place. An empty beer can stood at attention beside his chair. My husband's disappearance or abduction hadn't disturbed it one bit. Frank was gone. After taking a second to stop hyperventilating, I realized that there'd be no hope of getting back to land without him. At least not at night. We'd been on smaller boats together before, and Frank had shown me the basics. But to make a boat move an inch is one thing. To sail it from there to a serviceable port at night is a totally different situation. There was no phone service, barely any internet, and I couldn't say with any kind of certainty where I even was. It had become a living nightmare, or at least I thought it had. At the time, I retreated to the cabin and locked the door behind me. I couldn't sleep, hell, I could barely even breathe. But I had to wait for him or morning, whatever came first. I stayed like that, staring at shards of moonlight to the moon, for a few more hours. Suddenly, the boat seemed to tip almost sideways, and my mind flooded with horrible thoughts of capsizing. But we leveled out with a thud. Something had crawled onto the deck. Something big. My body tensed up, folding up in fear like human origami. I could hear heavy footsteps through the thin walls of the cabin, moving up, towards the bow. The moonlight shards were broken by something walking in front of the portholes outside. I caught an inch of khaki fabric as it passed. Frank. I darted up from the bed and unlocked the cabin door, bursting onto the deck. I followed Frank's wet footprints from the stern to the bow, calling him several times and being met with no response, until I saw him, staring off into the sea at the very tip of the boat. I could only see him from behind. My footsteps slowed as I got closer to him. Something was wrong. I could feel some inkling of ineffable dread tugging at me, telling me to run. Frank wasn't just soaked. He looked truly ragged, like he'd been gone for weeks. For weeks, tufts of hair were missing from the back of his head from what I could see. The baseball cap and the ugly knockoff shades were gone too. His whole body looked turgid with water, like a corpse that had been dredged from the sea. "Frank, are you okay?" I said, speaking no louder than a whisper. He was humming. It was the unmistakable tune of Beyond the Sea Again. The skin of his hands seemed pale, almost waxy, like the light didn't agree with them. The tips of his fingers looked ragged and fleshy. They were dripping with something dark. I had to choke back the urge to vomit when I realized something had torn me. Off his fingernails. Frank didn't seem to mind. "They took me," Frank suddenly hissed, and a voice, barely his own. It felt garbled, drowned like he was speaking from underwater. He was clutching his old fishing knife and his trembling wet hand. The blade looked worn, dull, and stained with blood. It wasn't old blood either. It dripped in generous globs from the cold metal onto the deck. "Frank, I need you to calm down," I told him. His breathing felt like the roiling ocean, like a snake uncurling its belly. "I think you fell off the boat. Maybe you're a little shocked. Just come to bed. It'll all be fine. I couldn't fall," he said in his drowned voice. "They took me, didn't they? They shall show me their world." "Their world?" I asked, frightened. I was starting to cry. I'd always heard that we know more about space than we did about the deep ocean, but that still didn't count to Frank's ramblings. "Please, honey, you're scaring me. This needs to stop. "Shut up, woman," Frank barfed. "It wasn't like him to be short like that. But showing you the things, they showed me sweetness." "Yes," Frank said, as he began to turn indeed witnesses to their glorious kingdom. "Let me take him to the deep with me, darling." When I saw Frank's face, I screamed. "You could have probably heard it all the way back to Biscayne," Frank said, lifting up the knife. "I'm going to need your eyes." Frank's eye sockets were bleeding craters now, as though the eyes had just been plucked out. Black blood ran in rivulets down his scarred cheeks. His mouth dangled open as though his jaw had been snapped. Now full of black blood where his tongue had been torn out from its root. His face was like a violent, ugly cartoon. "What do you mean?" Frank said. His slack jaw never moved when he talked. But then again, it didn't seem as though his voice came from his mouth at all. That monstrous, cursed voice seemed to bleed like black blood from every pore. With that, I felt a surge of adrenaline and darted towards the cabin, while the thing that was once my husband, now this huge hulking gorilla of a man with his wide mouth and eyeless stare, lumbered quickly behind me. The boat trembled under his heavy footsteps as I bolted into the cabin and slammed the door behind me, locking it frantically as he approached. I collapsed onto the ground after that, aching and sobbing. "Come with me, darling, to their world. Come and see the delights they have in store for us." I saw the torture on his face and hands and skin. His body looked like a portrait of agony. I knew that the thing out there was not my husband. It couldn't be. It may have been wearing Frank's clothes. It might even have been wearing Frank. That was not Frank. Frank would have known instantly that his key to the cabin door was in the breast pocket of his jacket, and it's only a matter of time until whatever is wearing Frank figures that